Hello and welcome to Film Companion South. In this episode, we are going to be talking about Selvaraj's Karnan, which stars Dhanush and Rajisha Vijayan. The best of screenwriters cannot imagine something like the Mahabharata because there are so many subplots, so many plots, so many characters, and one of the richest and most fascinating characters is that of Karna because he is actually born a demigod. He is the son of a queen and a god, Surya. So he is actually a demigod, but then he's abandoned by his mother and he's raised by people from the oppressed communities. So no wonder he's often seen as an outsider, as a tragic figure, and he never gets what he wants, because he keeps giving things away, but he never gets what he really wants. He doesn't get his mother, he doesn't get his brothers, and he doesn't get the woman he supposedly loved in some versions of the Mahabharata, who is Draupadi. Now, my favorite filmic version of the Mahabharata is Shyam Benegal's Kalyug, which is just brilliant. It sets it amongst two industrial warring families, and Shashi Kapoor plays the Karna character. But I think what most of us Tamil viewers know are Maniratnam's Thalapathy, an unofficial biopic of Karna with the Kunti, Duryodhana, Karna, Draupadi characters all in there, but placing the Karna, making Karna the hero of the story rather than the traditional Arjuna. And the other one, of course, is the actual biopic of Karna, which is Karnan, made by B.R. Pantulu with Shivaji Ganeshan in the 1960s. Now, there are some minor callbacks to some of these earlier films, and I don't even know if it's intentional. Like one scene that strongly reminded me of Thalapathy was the sun shining in the background as a mother was rocking her child in a tuli. So you strongly get this mother, son, god, father, and child dynamic happening in the same frame, even though this child in that tuli is not actually Karnan. And there's another scene where characters are wearing a Rajnikant from Thalapathy t-shirt. But what Selvaraj does with the Karna story is actually something amazing. He retains both the heroism of the character and the tragedy of the character. Now, if you've heard Santhosh Narayanan's Kanda Varasolunga song, there is this line that says, Kavasam Kandathilla, Kundalamum illa, Valtuki Ninnan. So it's almost like he may not have the traditional Kavasa Kundalam that we associate Karnan with, but he had a sword and he fought with it. That's the kind of sense that you got. So I went in thinking it would be a rousing story of Karnan saving his community with a sword. Well, it is kind of that story, but it is also a story of the tragedy of that community. So there are going to be spoilers ahead, be warned. I'm going to start with the first scene where we'll see a little girl dying. She's in the middle of the road and there are buses passing by. The buses don't stop. That is one of the many symbols and metaphors in this film. The village where Karnan's community lives, they have no bus stop of their own. So they have to hitch rides from people passing by or with vehicles passing by. And one of the things that emerges as a theme is the fact that there is no bus stop. Karnan actually says this. The fact that there is no bus stops makes these people stay there. It doesn't allow them to travel long distances. And that's where the others want them. That is the dominant caste. They want to keep this community contained in that village and not kind of spread their wings. Now, while speaking to Film Companion South, Selvaraj said that Karnan was a lifestyle movie. And while I didn't fully understand it then, I think I get it now. The first half of the film is dedicated to the lifestyle of this community, the way they live. It's about the games they play, it's about the death ceremonies, it's about the customs and rituals, it's about how much joy the dominant community or the neighboring dominant community derives from oppressing this community. And it's especially about how the people that die transform into gods, like small gods. I don't know what the word is in English for it, but the native village gods. Now, even as this lifestyle movie is unfolding around us, we begin to get the arc of transformation of Karnan. At first, he's the kind of guy who sees an eagle taking away a chicken and he sees people around him wailing and saying that, oh God, this eagle has taken away this chicken. And he says, this happens every day. Why do we have to make such a big fuss about it? But this is actually a metaphor, right? It's about the powerful preying on the powerless on a daily basis. But at that point, Karnan doesn't seem to bother about it. But as the atrocities against his community increase, his anger also begins to increase. A girl is humiliated. There is an unfair kabaddi match. A conductor humiliates his village and therefore humiliates Dhanush himself, that is the Karnan character himself. And all of this builds and builds and builds until we get a spectacular intermission moment. This also involves a bus and there is action and it's all staged beautifully. But this is very unlike the usual intermission moment that we get in the movies, which leave us on a high. This one leaves us with mixed feelings. Even though Dhanush, that is the Karna character, technically wins, technically takes charge of the moment and finally his anger is unleashed to its fullest, this doesn't feel like a rousing moment at all, like I mentioned earlier. We are left with mixed feelings during this moment. So in one way, Selvaraj's second film is very different from his first film. Now, Pariyarum Perumal was all about, let's have a discussion, let's talk. Karnan is about, these guys are oppressing us, let's kill them. And yet, both films are similar in one way. They are not celebratory films. They are not about the fact that one community has won over the other. In fact, at the very end, when we get a celebratory dance, Dhanush is almost, the Karnan character is almost forced into it, and he's dancing with actual tears in his eyes. It's a very mixed kind of happiness that the film even ends with. And we get to the second half. So Karnan slash Dhanush's anger has been unleashed, and now he becomes a literal Pariyerum Perumal, that is a god sitting on a horse, a savior sitting on a horse. Again, this could be a symbol because in the olden days, during the war days, it was Kshatriyas mostly that sat on horses and rode into war. Most of the others, most of the lower communities were foot soldiers. And if he became really, really angry at the end of the first half, here his anger really wakes up his village, his community. And this is where the film really differs from Thalapathy. Now, Thalapathy was a very closed character drama. So the conflict was really a one-on-one conflict between the Arjuna character and the Karnan character. So that was the relationship drama that was happening here. Here, even if Karnan is fighting, even if Karnan is a savior, he is inseparable from his community. So it's the whole community that gets involved in the war that Mari Selvaraj stages in the second half, which is the equivalent of the Kurukshetra war. So on the one side, we have members of Karnan's community, Karnan's village, and on the other side, we have the police force, which represents government, which represents politics, which represents society. And the leader of the cops, brilliantly played by Nati, the cinematographer, is the Krishna character. I mean, he is literally named Karnabiran. Now, there is an inevitable comparison that's going to happen when a director makes a movie as powerful, as unique and singular as Pariyerum Perumal. You want to know what the second movie is, whether it's going to measure up. I think I found Pariyerum Perumal much more powerful because it is the story of a single man's angst, and the anger that boiled inside him like lava was the driving force of the movie. Here, because it's a story of a community and because Karnan is never separated from his community, there are many characters and the screenplay doesn't manage to do justice to all of them. Like some characters really, really stand out. Like I mentioned, the Kannabiran character, I actually wished he had been introduced far earlier in the screenplay. There is also Lakshmi Priya Chandramouli playing a very good role as Karnan's elder sister. But the Draupadi equivalent character, the love interest played by Rajisha Vijayan, could be taken out of the movie and you would never miss her at all. She has absolutely nothing to do. Adagam Perumal, who plays the leader of the dominant community village, he again has very little to do. Now, we all know what a great actor Lal is, so this is not an especially challenging performance for him, but he's very good on screen. And he plays the best friend equivalent of Karnan, even though he's much older. And what I really wished he'd been given more shades. Like he's this guy who's solid and is always by the side, but you kind of don't get a sense of him more than being a BFF kind of guy. And the screenplay also doesn't explore some touches very well. Like, for instance, there's a fascinating moment in the first half. I mean, a chilling, fascinating moment in the first half where Karnan's father is visited by the spirit of his dead daughter. He seems to be able to communicate with her in a way that the other people in the household don't seem able to. So, that I thought would have a big payoff in the second half when, let's say, Karnan is walking away from the war in his village because he's got a job and the father is the one leading him away. You know, Karnan says, I want to go back, and I actually thought that the father would be the one to say, go back, because he's gotten a visitation from the dead daughter who senses the problem and says, Appa, you cannot allow Karnan to leave the village, you have to send him right back. But it doesn't have a payoff. These kind of moments don't have payoffs in the second half. There's another big moment that I thought was not used as well, which is Karnan diving into a river and finding a sword that has been thrown in by his mother. That could have been a really rousing, mythical kind of moment, but I don't know, maybe because the film was already a little long, they cut it short or whatever, but it doesn't quite have the impact that you want it to have. But there are other mythical moments that work fantastically. There is this scene where Karnan has to slice a fish into two. It's this big heroic moment. And of course, it also involves a community. It's not just him alone just beating up some bad guys, which is the usual heroic moment in other films. But what I thought was happening was also the fact that you're transferring the fish from Arjuna to Karna in this act. Because what happens in the Mahabharata is that during the Draupadi Swayamvara, the whole thing about Arjuna is that he's the one who's able to hit the eye of the revolving fish around him. Here, the heroic act about the fish is performed by Karna. Now, speaking of the fish, I want to talk about what I felt was the most overdone bit of symbolism in the movie, the presence of so many creatures in the movie. You see pigs, you see a horse, you see a snail, you see a dog like Karupi, you see a butterfly, and you see especially a donkey, which is actually this film's Karupi, the actual mirror to the hero, the kind of animal, the spirit animal of this community. You get the point. We are all one and we share this world with everybody and everybody is equal. We also get a dialogue from this point when Karnan asks his village, "எத்தனை நாள் தான் நீங்க புழு பூச்சி மாதிரி இருக்க போறீங்க?" But the visual symbolism seems overdone, though again I'm going to present a caveat and say that maybe that a second viewing will settle some of these doubts in our mind. But there are other touches that work wonderfully, and even though they may just appear once or twice, they are not like sustained, like motifs or something like that. And one of them is this use of this Alayosai song, Poradada, Valendada, which is actually a song about the oppressed communities being asked to rise. And what is that if not what exactly Karnan does? He actually, the Poradada, Valendada, he actually pulls out a sword to fight. And then there's this moment which is my favorite moment in this whole movie, and it happens when Karnan applies for a post in the military. So there's all these physical tests, right? So there's a running race, and Karnan plays one of the people that makes it past the finish line, right? So he has won, and it should be a happy moment for him because he's one of the few that's kind of crossed the line. But then Mari Selvaraj turns the camera from Karnan's point of view and shows us the man who almost won, the man who almost went past that finish line. And you see that if we win, it comes at the cost of another person's loss. This is when you realize what a wonderful humanist Mari Selvaraj is. And many of you will find many such moments, and the big moments, all of them work beautifully. I'm not just talking about the action scenes or the big confrontation scenes. I'm talking about the scenes like the one where Dhanush barges into a police station and he wants to find some people from his village, and when he actually finds them, it's an overhead shot and the sun is shining. I actually had goose flesh the way that shot was staged. There is so much to talk about this film, not just from a political point of view, which I'm sure many people are going to do, but also from a filmmaking, from a purely cinematic, artistic point of view. Now, as a masala movie fan, we all know that one of the big masala movie elements is the reveal, the face reveal of the hero, right? And how does that happen here? Mari Selvaraj subverts even that. The actual hero is sitting in a police van with his face hooded, but we see his face appear on a wall as like a big mural as other people sing about him. So we are still getting the masala trope of people praising the hero, but we actually don't see the hero's face. We see him as a representation, not as an actual live person. He's a representation. And I told you that his face is hooded, right? This happens over and over again. A Buddha statue happens to be headless. A mural begins to be painted on the wall, but they don't complete the face on it till the end. And the Krishna character actually loses his face because he's beheaded. And I think this is about the loss of identity, because the minute you lose your face, you lose your identity. And somebody without a face is somebody without an identity. Like Pariyaran Perumal was carried fully by Kadir, Karnan is carried entirely by Dhanush. This is a fantastic performance, which is not very surprising because he's easily a best actor today. But what really surprises you is how many variations he finds to do things. For example, when a friend of his dies, we get a close-up of his eyes filled with tears, right? And that should register the emotion. But before we get that close-up of his eyes, we actually see him like in a close-up. We see the face in a close-up, and that reaction that he gives right then, that has that look of not just tragedy but also the futility of it all. And somehow that expression is so magnificent, you can't imagine anybody but Dhanush pulling it off. And I also love the fact that though he does his share of hero roles, when he gets the right kind of director or a director that he respects, he completely lets go of his ego. He allows himself to be slapped. In Asuran, he went and fell at everybody's feet in the village. Here, he allows himself to be slapped by a woman. Here, he allows himself to be, who happens to be his sister. Here, he gets slapped by a cop. And I'm not saying that these are big things, but I'm saying these are natural things that should happen to a character. But the hero character in our movies is so built up and so powerful and so unreal and godlike that when these small things happen without interference, and you just get this feeling that, wow, this hero is allowing himself to be a normal person that this movie needs. But finally, the hero of the film is Mari Selvaraj because he proves that Pariyarum Perumal was no fluke. And I say this because many people have one great story in them, but then they struggle to find the second story. The first thing is the story of their life. They've written it all their lives. They're waiting to put it on screen so it comes out fantastic. But then once that story is out, once that story of their life is out, they struggle to find a second story. That doesn't happen here at all. There are so many small touches in every moment that you feel that, for example, take the Krishna character. He's the villain of the piece, right? He's the bad guy. But when we first meet him, he seems to be the only guy who's actually interested about the people in the village. He's looking around, he's seeing this, how they actually suffer. He's seeing that the fact they don't have a bus to kind of, take them from place to place. You think that he might actually be a good guy, but what happens? And like with the Krishna character, Mari Selvaraj does very interesting things with the names of other characters, like especially from Karnan's community. He gives a couple of their names like Duryodhana and Abhimanyu and makes us wonder why the children of farmers can't carry the names of kings. And like the end of Pariyarum Perumal, we are left with mixed feelings at the end. Now, any director would like to leave the audience with a high at the end of the movie. We want to say the good guy won, the bad guy lost, everything's fine, the movie has fixed all the world's issues. But Mari Selvaraj says, a movie cannot solve everything, but at least it can make us ask questions. So that's it about Karnan. If you like this video, do subscribe to Film Companion South and see you soon at the movies.